You may be aware that John Calvin has referred to the Psalms as an anatomy of every part of the soul. That is, if you turn in the Psalter, you'll find a reflection of your current experience, depending on whether you're sad or encouraged or hopeful or being barraged with troubles. It's an anatomy. It's a whole reflection of the whole man. Augustine, similarly, had that same approach. He wrote a letter, a very lengthy letter once, to a Christian catechumen, a student, and he outlines the entire book of Psalms and saying, you turn to this psalm if you're experiencing heartache. You turn to this psalm if you're experiencing joy. If you need to be assured of God's presence, you turn to this psalm. And so, if we knew the Psalter better, we would have a place to turn no matter where we are emotionally. That's why we spend time to read through the Psalter and to try to understand it. Well, in that connection, let me say this, that Psalm 54 is a psalm for the betrayed but hopeful believer. Psalm 54 is a psalm for the betrayed but hopeful believer. And friends, that is good news for us, because we can't help living through this life without being betrayed, without being rejected. And yet, as Christians, we can experience that betrayal with hope. And that's what the psalmist does here. And we learn this from the superscription of Psalm 54, that is the inspired introduction before verse 1, which says this, to the chief musician with stringed instruments, a contemplation of David, when the Ziphites went and said to Saul, is David not hiding with us? Now that introduces the state that David was in when he penned this psalm. You'll remember, and you can find out more if you turn to 1 Samuel 23 later, that David at this point is the anointed king of Israel. And yet the sort of standing king, Saul, is trying to kill him. And he's been hunting David all over the countryside of the land of Canaan. And David hides in a certain place, and then Saul gets close, and he goes on the other side of the mountain, and they're crisscrossing through the countryside, and at one point David finds a refuge in the land of the Ziphites and takes a break, and at this point the Ziphites go and tell Saul, David's hiding among us. If you come, you can have him and you can kill him. So here's David, a betrayed person, betrayed by those whom he was called to reign over by the God who had called them to himself. And yet, David isn't despairing. He does, in the first few verses, call out for deliverance because he's been betrayed. Save me, O God, by your name. Vindicate me by your strength. Hear my prayer, O God. But he's not hopeless. He isn't despairing. And that's why he can say in the latter part of the psalm, verse 4, for example, behold, God is my helper. And then at the end, I will freely sacrifice to you. I will praise your name, O Lord, for it is good. Now let me ask you, why wasn't David despairing, though he had been betrayed? Well, there could be a number of reasons, but there's one very beautiful part of the story. In 1 Samuel 23, verse 16, we hear that just before David is betrayed, Jonathan comes to him in the woods and has a little meeting with him. And that's very significant because Jonathan was his bosom friend. They had sworn a covenant together to love each other, to support each other. And right at this moment, when David's about to be betrayed, Jonathan comes to him. And the text says that Jonathan strengthened his hand in the Lord. Jonathan strengthened David's hand in the Lord. David was encouraged by Jonathan. This man of God who loved him came to him and said, the Lord will surely be with you. I'll surely be with you. You're not forsaken. And perhaps just a brief moment of time later, he's betrayed. But he can pen this psalm in the context of betrayal because he's been encouraged in the Lord. Now that should underscore a few things for us. First of all, it should underscore the importance of human encouragement. Let me ask you, friends, do you know anyone who's been betrayed to whom you could be a Jonathan? That you could go and say, the Lord is with you, and we're with you. We love you and we care for you. Human encouragement is not to be overestimated in its importance. But there's something even greater that's going on here, because Jonathan here is a type, you might say, of the Holy Spirit. Jonathan comes along and encourages David in the Lord, but friends, that's what we have in the Holy Spirit. And so there are times when we're betrayed, and we might have no human comforter. We might have no Jonathan, but we have the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit comes to us and whispers the gospel into our ears, even when we're betrayed, and says, Christ will never leave you. He'll never forsake you. And so in that context, we can cry out for hope and help, but we can do so without despairing, because the Holy Spirit is our comforter.